The medical file had no name, only a 7-digit code that didn't match our hospital system. The patient in Suite 47 didn't exist in any database I could access, yet I was expected to monitor vitals, administer medications, and document symptoms for someone who, according to every official record, had never been admitted. They didn't offer me hush money that first week. They offered me a legal shield, because the people who'd treated this patient before me had already vanished from the industry, and someone wanted me to understand the pattern without saying it aloud. I took an oath to save lives, to protect the vulnerable, to speak truth in the service of healing. No one warned me that some truths carry a price higher than any salary, that some silences are purchased with your entire future, and that the Hippocratic Oath means nothing when you're standing between a dying empire and the lie that keeps it alive. The Vestra Institute wasn't a hospital. Hospitals have waiting rooms with crying children, fluorescent lights that hum, and the democratic chaos of human suffering. Vestra had imported Carrara marble floors that absorbed footsteps, air filtration systems that eliminated even the memory of antiseptic, and security protocols that made airport screening look casual. I'd worked in hospital intensive care for 6 years before Dr. Kelani recruited me. She'd found me at a nursing conference in Portland, waited until I'd finished a presentation on ethical documentation in high acuity settings, and made an offer that felt too specific to be coincidental. "We need someone who understands discretion," she'd said, handing me a business card made of actual metal. "Our clientele requires medical excellence and absolute confidentiality. The compensation reflects both requirements." The salary was triple what I made at Providence General. The signing bonus alone could have cleared my student loans. I should have asked why. My first month at Vestra taught me the vocabulary of wealth-adjacent medicine. We didn't have patients, we had guests. We didn't maintain charts, we created wellness profiles. The building itself, nestled in the San Juan Islands on a private inlet accessible only by helicopter or secured boat, wasn't licensed as a medical facility, but as a restorative retreat. Every employee signed a 47-page non-disclosure agreement before receiving credentials. The NDA had subsections about subsections, clauses that referenced sealed appendices, and penalty structures that escalated into 7-figure territory. My orientation lasted 3 days. The legal briefing took 5 hours. "You'll understand why when you begin," Dr. Kelani had assured me, her expression neutral as treaty negotiations. I understood now. Vestra existed in the space between legitimate healthcare and plausible deniability. We treated conditions that powerful people couldn't afford to have treated publicly: addiction, breakdown, scandal-adjacent injuries, the kind of medical crises that, if documented through normal channels, could destroy political campaigns, tank stock prices, or trigger succession battles. But that was still healthcare, still healing. Suite 47 was something else entirely. Before we go deeper into this story, I want to honor something you might be carrying right now. Maybe you've witnessed something you weren't supposed to see. Maybe you know a truth that powerful people would prefer stayed buried. Maybe you've been told that your integrity is worth less than their convenience, that your voice doesn't matter against their money, that silence is just the cost of survival in their world. I want you to know, your conscience is not currency. Your knowledge is not their property. Your moral clarity, even when it isolates you, even when it frightens you, even when it cost you everything you thought you needed. That clarity is the only thing that will let you sleep at night when all of this is over. You are not paranoid for noticing what they hoped you'd ignore. You are not disloyal for refusing to participate in someone else's lie. You are not weak for feeling afraid. Fear is just proof you understand what you're risking. Some of us were never meant to stay silent. Some of us were built to be the person who speaks when everyone else has found a reason to look away. And if that's you, if you're reading this and recognizing yourself in these words, then you already know. The weight of truth is heavy, but the weight of complicity is unbearable. Stand firm. You're stronger than you know. The situation is about to escalate in ways I never imagined. What started as unusual protocol is about to become something far more dangerous. If you're with Mr. Douglas Tales, comment, "I rise above every storm. My first 30 days at Vestra followed a predictable rhythm. I worked the overnight shift in the North Wing, monitoring guests recovering from procedures too delicate or too revealing for traditional facilities. A tech executive detoxing from opioids prescribed after a ski accident that never made the news. A diplomat's daughter recovering from a suicide attempt that her family's PR team had successfully reframed as exhaustion. A federal judge whose heart surgery happened in a facility with no public record of his admission. I told myself these were still patients, still people in pain. The secrecy was about dignity, not deception. I was good at the work, better than good. I'd spent years in ICU developing the situational awareness that separates adequate nurses from exceptional ones. The ability to read a monitor and a patient simultaneously, to catch the micro expressions that precede crashes, to know when vitals lie and instinct tells the truth. Dr. Kaylani noticed. After my second week, she started assigning me the complex cases. The guest with the compromised immune system, the one whose medication list read like a pharmacy inventory, the politician who kept trying to make phone calls despite doctors' orders, whose every word needed monitoring for signs of stroke-related aphasia. "You're wasted on routine recovery," she told me during a hallway conversation that felt like an evaluation. "You have clinical instincts most nurses never develop." I'd felt pride at that, professional validation, proof that my skills mattered, that excellence was still recognized even in this strange, marble-floored version of medicine. I had no idea she was preparing me. The night everything changed started like any other. I arrived at 10 p.m., checked in with the day shift supervisor, reviewed the census board. 8 occupied suites. Standard post-procedure monitoring, nothing acute. I made my rounds, checking IV lines and pain levels, updating charts that would be encrypted and archived in systems I didn't have clearance to access. Around 1 a.m., Dr. Kaylani appeared in the North Wing nurses' station. She never worked nights. "I need you in Suite 47, she said. "Starting tomorrow. Permanent assignment." I looked at the assignment board. Suite 47 wasn't listed. "It's a private wing," she continued, reading my confusion. "Separate access. You'll use the service elevator past the laundry. The suite has its own monitoring station. No rotation with other staff." "What's the medical situation?" I asked, already pulling up the facility map on my tablet, not finding any Suite 47. "You'll be briefed in the morning. For now, I need you to review these." She handed me a tablet I'd never seen before. Different manufacturer, different interface. The patient's medical history, medication protocols, and care parameters. Memorize everything tonight. The tablet will wipe at 6 a.m. I took the device. Who's the patient? Someone who requires your particular level of discretion and skill. Her expression gave nothing away. This is a career-defining opportunity. The compensation is being adjusted accordingly. You'll see the new contract tomorrow. Don't discuss this assignment with other staff. She left before I could ask anything else. I spent the rest of my shift in the break room, reading a medical history that made no sense. The patient, gender unspecified, age listed as 5th decade, no name anywhere in the documentation, had a condition I'd never encountered. Not a disease exactly, more like a constellation of symptoms that suggested multiple system failures, except the vitals were stable. The medication list included experimental compounds I couldn't identify, dosing schedules that violated every protocol I knew, and ominous notations. Contraindicated with public examination. Avoid standard tox screens. Maintain isolation protocols at all times. There were references to previous care providers. 4 names, each with dates. None had lasted more than 6 weeks. The tablet wiped itself at exactly 6 a.m., as promised. The screen went black mid-sentence, leaving me staring at my own reflection in dead glass. I should have walked away that morning, should have tendered my resignation, cited ethical concerns, gotten on the first ferry back to the mainland. Instead, I showed up at 9 a.m. to sign a new contract with a salary that made my previous generous compensation look like minimum wage, and to meet the patient who would make me understand that some secrets are kept not with money, but with controlled demolition of anyone who threatens to speak. Suite 47 occupied a wing I'd somehow never noticed in a building I thought I knew completely. The service elevator required a key card that had been waiting in my locker that morning, along with the new contract and a handwritten note from Dr. Kelani. Trust your training, document everything, tell no one. The elevator descended. I hadn't realized Vestra had a lower level, and opened onto a corridor that felt less like a medical facility and more like a climate-controlled vault. No windows. Air pressure slightly elevated. The lighting was different here, full spectrum and precisely calibrated, the kind of illumination used in surgical theatres where colour accuracy matters. 2 men in dark suits stood outside Suite 47. Not hospital security, private contractors, the kind with discreet earpieces, and the stillness of people trained to use violence efficiently. Identification, one said, not asked. I showed my new badge. He scanned it with a handheld device, checked something on his phone, then nodded. Dr. Kelani is inside. She's expecting you. No devices past this point except approved medical equipment. No photographs, no recordings, no external communication during your shift. I'd left my personal phone upstairs, as instructed. I hadn't expected to feel grateful for the separation. The suite's interior looked like what you'd get if you asked an architect to design a hospital room, with an unlimited budget and no oversight. Medical equipment I recognized, monitors, IV stands, crash cart, integrated seamlessly with furniture that belonged in a 5-star hotel. The patient bed was custom, clearly, with embedded monitoring and a mattress that probably cost more than my car. Dr. Kelani stood beside it, reviewing a tablet. She looked up when I entered. Close the door. Lock it. I did. What I'm about to tell you cannot be repeated, referenced, or alluded to outside this room, she began. Not to staff, family, friends, clergy, therapists, or law enforcement. Your contract includes provisions that make violation of this confidence a federal crime under trade secret law. Do you understand? I understand the words you're saying, I replied carefully. I don't understand what I'm protecting yet. You're protecting a life, she said. And in doing so, you're protecting approximately 40,000 other lives that depend on the continued function of the Byrne-Keller Corporation. I knew that name. Everyone did. Byrne-Keller manufactured 70% of the generic medications used in North American hospitals. They held patents on critical antivirals. They'd pioneered the cold chain logistics that made rural vaccination programs possible. The company's CEO, Larkin Byrne, was a billionaire who regularly appeared on lists of effective philanthropists, someone who'd turned inherited pharmaceutical wealth into genuine public health impact. Is this, I started, then stopped. Is Larkin Byrne the patient? Dr. Kehlani's expression didn't change. The patient's identity is not relevant to your care responsibilities. What is relevant? This individual is experiencing a progressive neurological condition that mimics early-stage Parkinson's, but with anomalous features that suggest environmental toxicity. Standard diagnostics have been inconclusive. The condition is being managed, not cured. Public knowledge of this illness would trigger immediate instability in pharmaceutical markets, compromise ongoing drug development projects, and create succession chaos in an organization with no clear leadership alternative. I looked at the empty bed. Where is the patient now? Undergoing imaging in the sub-level suite. You'll meet them shortly. First, I need you to understand the treatment protocol and your role in maintaining it. What followed was a 20-minute briefing that violated at least a dozen medical ethics principles I'd been taught to hold sacred. The patient was receiving an experimental treatment protocol that hadn't been approved by any regulatory body. The medications were being compounded off-site by a private laboratory with no FDA oversight. The dosing schedule was based on proprietary research that I wasn't cleared to review. And my job, my only job, was to administer these treatments, monitor for adverse reactions, and document everything in a sealed system that would never be seen by anyone outside a small circle of cleared personnel. What if there's an emergency? I asked. What if the patient crashes? There's a resuscitation protocol in the locked cabinet. You're authorized to use it. Beyond that, you contact me immediately on the secure line. She indicated a phone I hadn't noticed, mounted on the wall beside the bed. Under no circumstances do you contact facility-wide emergency services. This patient does not officially exist in the facility. And the previous nurses? The ones in the file? Something flickered across Dr. Kehlani's face. They were reassigned when they'd demonstrated insufficient discretion. Meaning what? Meaning they asked questions that revealed they weren't suited for this responsibility. She met my eyes. You strike me as someone who understands that some questions don't have answers you want to hear. The door lock clicked. We both turned. The person who entered looked smaller than I expected, diminished by illness in a way that wealth couldn't hide. Late 50s, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose proprioception had become unreliable. The tremor in the left hand was subtle but unmistakable. Behind them, a woman in an expensive suit who radiated the particular menace of high-level corporate attorneys. This is your new primary nurse, Dr. Kehlani said to the patient. Highly qualified, extremely discreet. The patient looked at me with eyes that carried something I couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe, or resignation, or the exhausted calculation of someone who'd stopped fighting and started managing decline. "Another one," the patient said softly. It was the first time I'd heard Larkin Byrne's voice outside of TED Talks and shareholder calls. "You understand what you've agreed to?" "I understand I'm here to provide care," I said. The attorney stepped forward. "You understand you're here to maintain confidentiality above all other concerns. Medical ethics, personal conscience, legal obligation to report, all of those are superseded by the NDA you signed and the federal protections that govern this treatment." I looked at Dr. Kelani. She nodded slightly. "I understand," I said, understanding nothing except that I'd just stepped into something far darker than I'd imagined. "Good," the attorney said. "Mr. Byrne requires rest now. You'll begin your first shift tonight at 8 p.m. 12-hour rotation, 7 days on, 3 days off. During your off rotation, you will not discuss this assignment, this location, or anything you observe here. You will not research Mr. Byrne's condition. You will not consult with outside medical professionals. You will provide care and maintain silence. Those are your only responsibilities." She left without waiting for acknowledgement. Larkin Byrne settled slowly into the bed, movements controlled and pained. Up close, I could see the other signs, the slight facial asymmetry, the way the left foot dragged microscopically, the cognitive processing delay before responses. This wasn't early stage anything. This was progression. "They've told you I'm dying," he said, not a question. "They've told me you're being treated for a neurological condition, which is killing me, slowly, probably painfully, though they're keeping me comfortable." He adjusted the pillow with his functioning hand. "What they haven't told you is why this needs to stay secret." Dr. Kelani cleared her throat. "Mr. Byrne, we discussed. She's going to be here 12 hours a day watching me deteriorate," he interrupted, voice sharp despite the physical weakness. "She deserves to know what she's protecting." He turned back to me. "Byrne Keller owns the patents on 17 essential medications, antivirals that prevent pandemic spread, antibiotics that fight resistant infections, the insulin that keeps millions alive. My death triggers a succession clause that transfers those patents to a corporate trust designed by lawyers who don't understand medicine and investors who only understand quarterly returns. Within 6 months, those medications will be reformulated for profit optimization. Prices will triple. Access will crater. People will die." "There are regulatory protections," I said. The FDA operates on information provided by pharmaceutical companies," he cut in. "And my company has spent 30 years building trust that makes our word gospel. The trust designed to take over will use that credibility to justify changes that maximize profit while technically meeting safety minimums. It's legal, it's effective, and it's monstrous. So you're hiding your illness to prevent corporate succession? I'm hiding my illness to buy time to restructure ownership in a way that protects public health. It requires legal mechanisms that take months to implement correctly. If my condition becomes public knowledge before those mechanisms are in place, the vultures will force immediate succession, and everything I've built will become a machine for extracting wealth from human suffering." Dr. Kelani interjected, "Which is why this treatment is happening here, under these conditions. We're managing decline while buying time for legal restructuring. Your role is clinical support, nothing more." I looked between them. And if I can't accept those terms? The attorney's voice came from the doorway. She'd never actually left, just stepped outside. Then you'll discover that violating a federal trade secret protection carries penalties including imprisonment, asset seizure, and professional destruction. So absolute, you'll never work in healthcare again. We've demonstrated this with previous staff who mistook their moral discomfort for a right to speech. She smiled. It was the least human expression I'd ever seen on a face. But we're confident you'll choose to honor your commitment, she continued. Dr. Kalani selected you because you understand that sometimes healing requires silence. Welcome to Suite 47. My first week in Suite 47 taught me that there are rules, and then there are rules. The official protocols covered medication administration, vital monitoring, documentation procedures. The unofficial rules governed everything that actually mattered. When to pretend I hadn't heard something, which observations to record and which to forget, how to maintain professional distance while participating in a deception that felt less like healthcare and more like hostage-keeping. Larkin Byrne, I couldn't think of him as the patient after that first conversation, deteriorated in ways the official charts couldn't capture. The tremor worsened. The cognitive delays lengthened. Some mornings he couldn't remember which medication had which purpose. Confusion I'd document as mild disorientation, resolved with verbal cues, never writing what I observed. A brilliant mind losing its architecture one neuron at a time. His attorney, a woman named Judith Kane, visited daily. She'd arrive with documents that Larkin would sign using his right hand, the signatures growing shakier each week. Contracts, I assumed. Legal instruments to achieve whatever succession. Restructuring, he'd described. I never asked. The rules were clear. Observe nothing beyond medical necessity. But I couldn't help noticing what happened in those meetings. The tension that filled the room when Kane arrived. The way Larkin's vitals would spike. Elevated heart rate, increased blood pressure during their conversations. The exhaustion that would leave him non-responsive for hours afterward. During my second week, after a particularly brutal session, I broke protocol. Those meetings are making you worse, I said, while checking his IV line. Your recovery time after each visit has doubled. Whatever she's pushing you to sign, it can wait until you're more stable. Larkin looked at me with something like gratitude. She's not pushing me to sign. She's ensuring I understand that every day I delay is another day the trust's provisional authority strengthens. There are board members who've already figured out something's wrong. They're positioning for control. If I don't complete the restructuring before they can challenge my competency, everything fails. You're being extorted by your own company. I'm being managed by people who've decided that a dying CEO is a liability to be contained rather than a human being to be supported. He paused, gathering energy for the next words. The trust was supposed to be temporary, a succession plan for when I eventually stepped down, but the lawyers who drafted it included provisions that make it nearly impossible to dismantle without my complete cognitive capacity, which I no longer have. Can't you just make the case publicly, explain what's happening? And admit I've been secretly ill while running a pharmaceutical company, that I've been making decisions about drug development and pricing while experiencing neurological decline? The lawsuits would be instantaneous. Every medication approval, every regulatory filing, every contract for the past year would be challenged. The company would collapse under the weight of litigation before it could be restructured. I understood then. He wasn't just hiding to protect patents. He was trapped in a cage built from his own secrecy, and every day the bars grew narrower. "How long do you have?" I asked. Honestly, the experimental treatment is slowing progression, but not stopping it. 6 months, maybe less. He closed his eyes. 6 months to undo legal frameworks that took decades to create, while pretending to be healthy enough that no one challenges my authority. I finished checking his vitals in silence. That night, alone in the monitoring station, I reviewed the treatment protocol again. The medications weren't slowing progression, they were masking symptoms, creating windows of lucidity that Larkin could use to appear functional in video conferences and document signings. It was medical theatre, buying performance time at the cost of honest assessment. I'd been hired to help a dying man pretend to be healthy enough to save his company from itself, and I had signed papers that made refusing to participate a federal crime. The third week, new people started appearing. Not doctors or nurses, but corporate types whose body language screamed threat assessment. They'd arrive in pairs, review documents I wasn't allowed to see, have conversations in corners too far from the monitoring station for me to overhear, but close enough to signal their presence was intentional. Dr. Kilani noticed my attention. "Board observers," she explained during a shift handoff. "Completely routine oversight. Ignore them." Except they weren't reviewing medical records. They were reviewing Larkin himself, watching how he moved, timing his response delays, documenting every tremor and stumble like lawyers building a case. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to catch. Two observers outside Suite 47, voices low but urgent. The delay between question and response is now averaging 2.3 seconds, up from 1.7 last week. Kane says he's still passing cognitive assessments. Kane is managing optics. I'm measuring reality. If we wait much longer, any legal documents he signs will be vulnerable to competency challenges. So we accelerate the timeline. We do, and we make sure the medical staff understands their role in confirming cognitive stability. They notice me then, standing frozen with an IV bag I'd been preparing. The conversation stopped. One of them smiled, the same predatory expression I'd seen on Judith Kane. "How is Mr. Byrne today?" he asked, tone conversational and completely false. "Stable," I said, defaulting to medical neutrality. "Vitals within normal parameters." "And his mental acuity? Any signs of confusion or disorientation?" This was a trap. I could feel it. "You'd need to ask Dr. Kailani," I replied. "I'm not qualified to provide cognitive assessments." "But you're with him 12 hours a day. Surely you notice things." He stepped closer. "We're trying to help Mr. Byrne, you understand. Ensure he's receiving appropriate care. Sometimes frontline medical staff observe changes that doctors miss. Any observations you could share would be helpful." I understood what he was really asking. Will you confirm he's declining faster than official records indicate? Will you provide documentation we can use to challenge his legal authority? I observe a patient receiving treatment according to established protocols, I said carefully. Anything beyond that should be discussed with his primary care team. The smile didn't falter. "Of course. Professional boundaries. Very appropriate." He handed me a business card. "But if you do notice anything concerning, anything at all, please contact me directly. We want to ensure Mr. Byrne receives the support he needs." The card identified him as Gregory Vale, Special counsel to the Byrne-Keller Board of Directors. I dropped it in the hazardous waste bin after he left. That night, Larkin was more alert than usual, the medication creating one of those false windows of clarity that made everything worse because we both knew it was temporary. "They're building a case," he said quietly. "Vale and the others, documenting every sign of decline so they can have me declared incompetent before I finish the legal restructuring." Can they do that? If they can demonstrate I lack capacity to make informed decisions, yes. The trust provisions include clauses that allow board intervention in cases of medical incapacity. It's supposed to protect the company from impaired leadership. In practice, it's a mechanism for hostile takeover disguised as corporate governance. What happens if they succeed? Everything I've been trying to prevent happens immediately. The trust takes control. The patents get monetized. Medication prices skyrocket. And I'll have spent my final months trapped in this room, watching my life's work get dismantled by lawyers who think fiduciary duty means maximizing shareholder return regardless of human cost. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Calculation. "You're not like the others," he said. "The previous nurses. They treated this as a job with unusual requirements. You're questioning it. Is that a problem? It's dangerous. For both of us." He paused. "The NDAs you signed, the federal protections Kane threatened you with, they're real, but they're also weapons pointed at you to ensure compliance. If you start asking uncomfortable questions, becoming inconvenient, you'll discover that legal destruction isn't hypothetical." "Then why are you telling me this?" "Because I need someone who understands what's actually happening. Someone who might care enough to—" He trailed off, energy visibly fading. "Never mind. Forget I said anything. Just do your job. Stay safe." But I couldn't forget, and I couldn't stay safely neutral anymore. The next morning, I did something stupid. I created a second documentation system. The official charts recorded what I was supposed to record: stable vitals, manage symptoms, cognitive function within expected parameters. But on my personal laptop, in encrypted files I backed up to a thumb drive I kept in my apartment, I started recording the truth: the accelerating decline, the medications that masked rather than treated, the conversations I overheard, the pressure being applied. I told myself it was clinical due diligence, protecting myself in case something went wrong, creating a record that proved I'd observed and reported concerning patterns. I was lying to myself. I was building evidence for something I hadn't yet admitted I was planning to do. It happened during my 4th week, on a Tuesday that started like any other, except for the text from Dr. Kehlani at 6 p.m. "Suite 47 tonight. Come prepared for extended shift. Bring overnight supplies." I'd never worked an overnight in Suite 47. The usual rotation had me leaving at 8 p.m., replaced by another nurse whose name I'd never learned and whose face I'd only seen in passing. The segmentation was intentional. No single staff member was supposed to see the full picture. When I arrived, the overnight nurse was leaving early, escorted out by security with the urgent efficiency of a problem being removed. Dr. Kehlani waited at the suite entrance. "The night shift has been discontinued," she said, without preamble. "You'll be covering round-the-clock care until further notice. We're bringing in a cot. There's a shower in the adjacent room. Meals will be delivered." "What's happening?" "Mr. Byrne's condition is entering a critical phase. We need consistent monitoring and someone who understands the full context of his treatment. That's you now. Inside Suite 47, Larkin looked worse than I'd ever seen him. The tremor had spread to both hands. His speech was slurred, but his eyes were sharp, tracking movement with an intensity that suggested whatever was failing in his body, his mind was fighting to stay present. Judith Kane stood beside his bed, tablet in hand, radiating controlled fury. "We need your professional assessment," she said to me. "Is Mr. Byrne cognitively capable of understanding complex legal documents?" This was the trap they'd been building toward. Answer yes, and I'd be complicit in whatever documents they were forcing him to sign. Answer no, and I'd provide the incompetency evidence his enemies needed. "I'm not qualified to make cognitive assessments," I said again. "You're a licensed nurse with 6 years of critical care experience. Your observations carry medical weight." She thrust the tablet toward me. "Yes or no? Is Mr. Byrne presently capable of informed consent?" I looked at Larkin. He met my eyes and shook his head. So slightly, I almost missed it. "I need to consult with Dr. Kailani before providing any assessment that might have legal implications," I said. Kane's expression hardened. "Dr. Kailani has already provided her assessment. I need yours, now." "Then you need to give me time to conduct a proper evaluation using standardized cognitive assessment tools. I can't provide professional judgment based on casual observation." "This isn't casual. This is your job." "My job is patient care, not legal consultation. If you need cognitive capacity assessment, you need a neuropsychologist, not a nurse." The silence that followed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Kane set down the tablet. "Step outside, please. Now." Dr. Kailani touched my arm, a warning. I followed them both into the hallway. The door sealed behind us. Kane wheeled on me immediately. "Your contract specifies compliance with all reasonable medical documentation requests," she hissed. "That wasn't compliance. That was obstruction. That was professional ethics. I don't provide clinical assessments under coercion." "You don't understand what you're interfering with. Mr. Byrne needs to complete critical legal restructuring. Tonight. Documents that require his signature and verified cognitive capacity. Every hour of delay gives his opponents more time to challenge his authority. Then get a proper cognitive evaluation from a qualified specialist." "We don't have time for specialists. We have you, and you will provide the assessment we need, or you will discover exactly how binding your NDA is." Dr. Kailani finally spoke. "Perhaps we should consider—" "No," Kane cut her off. "This nurse understands the stakes. She's choosing to prioritize personal ethics over the greater good. That's a choice with consequences." She pulled out her phone, typed something, then looked at me. "You're being placed on immediate administrative leave. Security will escort you from the facility. Your access is revoked effective now. You will receive communication from our legal team within 24 hours regarding your violations of the non-disclosure agreement and your employment contract. I suggest you retain counsel." "I haven't violated anything." "You've refused a direct order from medical administration and demonstrated unwillingness to support Mr. Byrne's treatment objectives. That constitutes breach of contract and failure to perform assigned duties." She smiled that dead smile. "We'll be generous in the termination settlement, provided you maintain absolute silence about everything you've observed here. Speak to anyone, lawyers, press, medical boards, and will destroy you so completely that you'll wish you'd never entered healthcare. Security appeared then, the same contractors who'd checked my badge on day one. They flanked me, professional and implacable. Your belongings will be packed and shipped, Kane continued. You have 5 minutes to collect personal items from the monitoring station. Nothing else. No files, no notes, no documentation. I wanted to argue, wanted to demand access to Larkin, to patient advocacy, to some authority higher than this attorney who'd turned healthcare into corporate enforcement. But I could see in her expression that arguing would only make things worse. She wanted me to fight, wanted an excuse to make the legal destruction immediate and public. So I went to the monitoring station, collected my jacket and water bottle, and let security escort me to the surface elevator. As the doors closed, I looked back at Suite 47. Through the small window, I could see Judith Kane returning inside, tablet in hand, ready to force a dying man to sign documents he was barely conscious enough to understand. And I understood. This was never about healing. It was about maintaining the illusion of capacity long enough to execute legal maneuvers that served everyone except the patient I'd sworn to protect. The elevator rose. I rose with it, carrying nothing but my jacket and the growing certainty that everything I'd witnessed in Suite 47 was not just unethical, it was criminal, and I was the only person who knew enough to prove it. What started as unusual medical protocols has become something far darker. The evidence I've been quietly documenting, the real observations versus the official records, isn't just proof of unethical treatment anymore. It's ammunition in a corporate war where a dying man's humanity has become collateral damage. I've been removed from Suite 47, threatened with legal destruction, told that my silence is mandatory and my conscience is irrelevant. They made a mistake, though. They assumed I'd be too afraid to act. They assumed wrong. If you believe some truths are worth the cost of speaking them, subscribe to Mr. Douglas Tales for stories that prove courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to do what's right anyway. I made it home to my apartment on the mainland by 11 p.m., still numb from the shock of termination. My hands shook as I unlocked the door. Not from fear yet, just the adrenaline crash of confrontation without resolution. The first email arrived at 11:47 p.m. Subject: Legal notice, mandatory confidential review. It came from a law firm I'd never heard of, Strickland and Howell, attorneys at law, with a Seattle address and a signature block that listed 23 partners. The email was 3 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple message. I'd violated my NDA by refusing to perform assigned duties in support of patient confidentiality objectives, and I was hereby notified of pending litigation seeking monetary damages, injunctive relief, and criminal referral for violation of federal trade secret protections. Attached was a proposed settlement, $50,000 payment to me in exchange for signing an expanded confidentiality agreement that included a confession of contract breach, a perpetual non-disparagement clause, and an acknowledgement that any future discussion of my employment at Vestra would constitute contempt of court. I was being paid to admit I'd done something wrong and promise never to speak again. The second email arrived at 12:03 a.m. from a personal account I didn't recognize. Subject: They're watching your apartment. Message: black SUV, north corner of your building. Shift change every 6 hours. Don't go to police. Don't call lawyers. They've already prepared preemptive injunctions. You need someone who understands how these people operate. I can help. Reply yes or no, nothing else. I went to my window. Sure enough, black SUV, tinted windows, positioned with clear sightlines to my building entrance. I sat on my floor, back against the wall, and understood with crystalline clarity I'd become a liability to be managed. The termination wasn't punishment. It was phase one of a systematic process to ensure my silence. The legal threats were phase two. The surveillance was phase three. I didn't know what phase four looked like, but I knew enough about powerful people protecting secrets to guess it wouldn't involve more emails. I opened my laptop and accessed the encrypted files I'd been maintaining. The real documentation. The observations that contradicted official records. The medication discrepancies. The conversations I'd overheard. The pattern of cognitive decline being masked for legal purposes. Then I did something that either saved my life or ended it. I still don't know which. I replied to the anonymous email, yes. The response came in seconds. Coffee shop on Madison, 2 blocks west of your building. 6 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. Bring nothing. They're monitoring your devices. I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent the night creating multiple backups of my documentation, storing them in cloud services under fake accounts, emailing copies to myself through encrypted services, even printing hard copies that I divided between my apartment and a storage unit I rented at 4 a.m. using a fake name. If they were going to silence me, I'd make sure the truth survived anyway. At 5:45 a.m., I left my apartment through the basement service entrance, walked 3 blocks in the wrong direction, then doubled back through an alley that brought me to the coffee shop from an unexpected angle. Old ICU habits. Never approach a crisis the expected way. The person waiting for me wasn't what I expected. She was maybe 60, dressed like a corporate executive, drinking black coffee and reading the Wall Street Journal like she had all the time in the world. When I sat down across from her, she didn't look up. You were smart to take the service exit, she said. The surveillance team hasn't figured out that route yet. You have about 15 minutes before they expand the perimeter. Who are you? Someone who used to work for Byrne Keller. Someone who knows how they operate when protecting corporate interests. Someone who's seen what they do to people who become inconvenient. She finally looked at me. My name is Marion Tesla. I was Larkin Byrne's executive assistant for 12 years, until I made the same mistake you just made. I witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see, and I refused to pretend I hadn't. What happened to you? They destroyed my career, froze my assets through spurious litigation, and made sure every potential employer in the healthcare industry understood that hiring me would mean inheriting my legal problems. She smiled without humor. I spent 4 years fighting them in court. Lost everything, won nothing. They're very good at this. Then why are you helping me? Because Larkin Byrne is dying, and the corporate machinery built around him is going to sacrifice thousands of lives to protect quarterly earnings. Someone needs to stop that. I couldn't, but you might be able to. She slid a thumb drive across the table. Everything they did to me, every lawsuit, every intimidation tactic, every legal maneuver, pattern and practice evidence. It won't help you win, but it will help you understand what you're facing. And it might help you avoid the mistakes I made. Like what? Like trusting lawyers who promise to help but are actually gathering information for the other side. Like going to regulatory agencies that are too compromised by industry relationships to take action. Like believing that having the truth on your side means anything when you're fighting people who can afford to make truth irrelevant. So what do I do? Marion leaned forward. You need to ask yourself what you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to save Larkin Byrne? Because he's beyond saving. The illness is terminal, no matter what treatment he receives. Are you trying to save yourself? Because the moment you refused Judith Kane's order, you became unsavable. Or are you trying to expose what's happening so someone with actual power can intervene? The last one. Then you need evidence that's undeniable and a platform that can't be silenced before the truth comes out. You have the evidence. I can see it in how careful you've been, how you came here. But you need the platform. You need media that's brave enough to run with this, despite legal threats. You need regulatory investigators who haven't been captured by industry relationships. And you need it all to happen simultaneously, because the moment Byrne Keller knows you're talking, they'll unleash everything they have to bury the story before it breaks. You're saying I need to go public all at once. I'm saying you need to detonate the truth before they can diffuse it. One journalist, one regulator, one exposure point. They'll contain it. Multiple journalists, multiple regulatory bodies, multiple exposure points, all at the same time. They can't stop all of it. She stood to leave. The thumb drive has contact information for people I trust. Journalists who've covered pharmaceutical corruption. FDA investigators who've bucked industry pressure. Medical ethics boards that still have integrity. Use them, but move fast. Every hour you wait is another hour they're building the legal infrastructure to destroy you. Why didn't you do this when they came after you? Marion looked at me with an expression that combined pity and admiration. Because I didn't have what you have. Proof that they're keeping a dying CEO medicated and isolated to manipulate corporate succession. That's not just unethical medical practice. That's elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. You're not just a disgruntled employee. You're a witness to crimes that could bring down an entire corporate leadership. That's why they're scared, and that's why you might actually win. She walked out, leaving me with a thumb drive and a decision that would define whatever came next. I had the evidence. I had the contacts. I had the truth. What I didn't have was any illusion that telling it would be anything other than professional suicide. But Marion was right about one thing. If I stayed silent, thousands of people would suffer when Byrne Keller's medication patents got weaponized for profit. If I spoke and failed, I'd be destroyed. If I spoke and succeeded, I might save lives at the cost of my own. That's not really a choice, is it? I spent the next 6 hours at a public library, using their computers to review Marion's files and make contact with the people she'd recommended. 3 journalists who'd written about pharmaceutical industry corruption. 2 FDA investigators, known for following evidence wherever it led. 1 medical ethics attorney who specialized in defending whistleblowers. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Initial interest, careful questions about my evidence, then the same conclusion. This is explosive, but we need more than documentation. We need testimony from someone still inside Vestra who can corroborate your account. Can you get that? I couldn't. I was locked out, isolated, and under surveillance. The attorney was bluntest. Without inside corroboration, they'll paint you as a disgruntled employee who misunderstood complex medical protocols. Your documentation is compelling, but their legal team will argue it's taken out of context. that you're not qualified to interpret specialized treatment, that you signed NDAs because you understood the proprietary nature of the work. You need someone from their side willing to break ranks. Otherwise, this is your word against a multi-billion-dollar corporation's reputation. I left the library at 4 p.m., exhausted and trapped. I had evidence no one could use. I had truth no one could hear. I had documentation that proved crimes, but no platform that could survive the legal assault that would follow publication. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered. Hello? We need to talk. Judith Kane's voice, smooth as a threat. In person. Tonight. There's been a misunderstanding that we'd like to resolve. I don't think we have anything to discuss. I think we have quite a lot to discuss, including your apparent communications with certain journalists and regulatory personnel today. She paused for effect. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? That we don't monitor for exactly these patterns? My stomach dropped. They'd been tracking my contacts. I haven't violated my NDA, I said. Not yet. But you've demonstrated intent to do so, which gives us grounds to seek preemptive injunctions and criminal referral, unless we can reach an understanding. Tonight, 7 p.m. There's a restaurant called Meridian on First Avenue. I've reserved a private room. Come alone. Come unarmed. Come ready to have a reasonable conversation about resolving this situation in a way that protects everyone's interests. What if I refuse? Then at 7:01 p.m., our legal team files for emergency injunctions in federal court, your bank accounts get frozen pending litigation, and law enforcement receives criminal referral packages alleging theft of trade secrets, violation of federal confidentiality statutes, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. You'll be arrested by morning, and while you're sitting in jail, waiting for arraignment, we'll have all the time we need to control the narrative about a troubled nurse who stole medical records and attempted to extort her former employer. That's a lie. That's a story, and we have the resources to make stories become truth. 7 p.m. Don't be late. She hung up. I stood on the sidewalk, people flowing around me, and understood. They were offering me one last chance to take their money and disappear. Or they were luring me to a meeting where I'd sign documents under duress, or worse, where I'd simply disappear. Another inconvenient witness who'd decided to relocate somewhere without extradition. I thought about running, just leaving Seattle, leaving the state, vanishing into the kind of anonymity that makes legal action impractical. But running meant abandoning Larkin Byrne to whatever Kane and the board had planned. It meant letting the medication patents get weaponized. It meant that everything I'd risked had been for nothing. So at 6:45 p.m., I walked into Meridian Restaurant, was escorted to a private dining room, and found Judith Kane waiting with someone I recognized from news coverage. Rebecca Stross, CEO of the Byrne Keller Trust, the entity designed to take control when Larkin was declared incompetent. Thank you for coming, Kane said, gesturing to a chair. Please, sit. Can we order you something? I'm not hungry. Straight to business, then. Good. Rebecca Stross leaned forward, hands folded in a gesture I recognized from corporate negotiation training. We want to resolve this situation amicably. You're a talented nurse who encountered a complex medical situation and understandably had questions about protocols that seem unusual outside specialized contexts. We appreciate your dedication to patient advocacy. It speaks to exactly the kind of conscientious professionalism we value. You fired me. We terminated your specific assignment due to concerns about role alignment, Kane corrected. But we're prepared to offer reinstatement with a significant promotion. Lead nurse for our new patient advocacy program. 60% salary increase, full benefits restoration, signing bonus of $150,000. I stared at them. In exchange for what? In exchange for acknowledging that you misunderstood certain treatment protocols, that you now recognize Mr. Byrne's care meets all appropriate medical and ethical standards, and that you're willing to provide written testimony to that effect should any regulatory questions arise. You want me to lie? We want you to correct a misperception, Stross said smoothly. You observed specialized treatment through a limited lens. Now, with fuller context, you can accurately represent what you witnessed. That's not dishonesty, that's professional growth. And if I refuse? Kane's expression hardened. Then we pursue the legal remedies we discussed. You'll face criminal charges, civil litigation, and professional destruction. We'll ensure every healthcare facility in North America understands that you violated patient confidentiality, stole medical records, and attempted to leverage proprietary information for personal gain. You'll never work as a nurse again. You'll be bankrupt, and you'll very likely be incarcerated. For refusing to participate in medical fraud? For violating legally binding contracts that you signed freely and benefited from substantially. Stross slid a document across the table. This is the agreement. It's generous, it's fair, and it's the only offer you'll receive. Sign it tonight, and this entire situation disappears. Refuse, and we'll make you disappear instead. I picked up the document, 20 pages of legal language that boiled down to confess wrongdoing, promise silence, provide false testimony if needed, and accept money as compensation for abandoning ethics. You need to understand something, I said carefully. I have documentation, recorded observations, evidence of medication protocols that violate treatment standards, proof that Mr. Byrne is being kept sedated and isolated for corporate purposes, not medical ones. We're aware of your documentation, Kane replied. It's incomplete, it's misinterpreted, and it's inadmissible because it was created in violation of your NDA. No court will accept it, no regulator will act on it, and no journalist will publish it once we explain the legal consequences they'd face. You can't suppress truth just because it's inconvenient. We can absolutely suppress defamatory fiction created by a disgruntled employee who violated confidentiality agreements. Stross stood. You have a choice. Take the generous offer and rebuild your life, or refuse and watch us dismantle everything you've built. We've done this before. We're very good at it, and we have unlimited resources to ensure you understand exactly how powerless you are. They left the document on the table and walked out, leaving me alone in a private dining room with a contract that would make me complicit in everything I'd been trying to expose. I sat there for 20 minutes, reading the agreement again and again, looking for any loophole, any protection, anything that would let me sign without becoming what they wanted. A co-conspirator who'd sold her integrity for a salary increase and a promise not to be destroyed. There was nothing. The contract was airtight. I left Meridian at 7:45 p.m. without signing anything. Outside, the black SUV was waiting, still watching, still documenting my movements. I walked home slowly, understanding that I'd just made an irreversible choice. I'd refused their offer, which meant they'd escalate to whatever came next. Marion's words echoed. You need to detonate the truth before they can defuse it. I had maybe 12 hours before they filed criminal charges. 12 hours to do what Marion couldn't: expose everything simultaneously in ways they couldn't contain. It was time to stop documenting and start detonating. The criminal referral came faster than I expected. At 5:37 a.m., while I was uploading my final documentation packages to encrypted servers and composing emails to every journalist and regulator Marion had recommended, someone started pounding on my apartment door. "Federal agents, open up." I froze. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. I had hours, not minutes. "We have a warrant. Open the door, or we're coming in." I grabbed my laptop, shoved it in my backpack, and ran to my bedroom window. Second floor. Maybe survivable if I jumped. Definitely stupid, but being arrested meant losing all access to my evidence, my contacts, my ability to speak. The door crashed open. I heard boots in my living room. "Bedroom! Move!" I climbed onto the window ledge, looking down at concrete that suddenly seemed much farther than 2 stories. "Hands where we can see them! Don't move!" I turned. 3 people in FBI windbreakers, weapons drawn, advancing with the controlled aggression of people executing a warrant they believed justified force. "I'm unarmed," I said, hands up, backpack dangling from one shoulder. "I'm a nurse. I don't understand what's happening." "Ma'am, step away from the window. Slowly. Keep your hands visible." I complied, mind racing. FBI meant federal charges. Meant Byrne Keller had convinced someone in law enforcement that I'd committed actual crimes, not just civil violations. They zip-tied my wrists, read me rights I barely heard, searched my apartment with the efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. "Laptop in the backpack," one agent called. "Phone in the bedroom." No additional devices visible. The lead agent, a woman in her 40s with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too many white-collar crime scenes, looked at me almost apologetically. "You're being arrested on federal charges of theft of trade secrets, violation of the Economic Espionage Act, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent and to an attorney. Do you understand these rights?" "I understand you've been lied to," I said. "I'm a nurse who witnessed medical fraud. I documented it. That's not espionage. That's whistleblowing. That's for courts to determine. Right now, you're coming with us." They walked me out in zip ties, past neighbors watching from doorways, into a waiting vehicle. The black SUV that had been surveilling my building was gone, replaced by legitimate law enforcement that had somehow been convinced I was a criminal instead of a witness. The processing at the federal building took hours. Fingerprints, photos, intake paperwork, a cell that smelled like despair, an industrial cleaner. Every request for a phone call met with, "You'll have access to counsel during arraignment." It wasn't until 2 p.m. that I was brought to an interrogation room where a public defender waited, looking exactly as overwhelmed as I felt. "I'm David Park," he said, reviewing papers that must have been my case file. "I've been assigned to represent you. We have about 15 minutes before arraignment. I need to understand what's happening here, because the charges are serious and the evidence against you appears substantial." "What evidence?" "According to the FBI affidavit, you stole proprietary medical records from your employer, contacted multiple journalists and regulatory officials with intention to publish trade secrets, and used stolen documentation to attempt to extort money from Byrne Keller Corporation." That's completely false. I documented medical fraud. I contacted journalists because I'm a whistleblower, not a criminal. Do you have proof you're a whistleblower? Formal reports to regulatory agencies? Official complaints filed through proper channels? I was locked out of proper channels. They fired me for refusing to participate in unethical treatment. David looked at me with something like pity. Without formal whistleblower status established through official channels, you're just a former employee who took confidential information. The federal judge is going to see extensive documentation that you signed NDAs, that you violated them, and that you attempted to leverage stolen information for personal gain. I never asked for money. They have emails showing you were offered a settlement and a promotion. They're arguing that your refusal and subsequent contact with media was an attempt to increase the settlement value. Classic extortion pattern. I understood then. They'd turned my refusal to sign their confession into evidence of criminal intent. Every action I'd taken to expose the truth had been reframed as proof of crimes. I need you to tell the judge everything I've told you, I said, about the medical fraud, the coercion, the surveillance. I can tell the judge you have concerns about your former employer's practices, David interrupted gently. But, without substantiated evidence and formal whistleblower status, that's just your opinion against their lawyers, and their lawyers are about to convince a federal judge that you're a flight risk who should be held without bail pending trial. I can't afford bail anyway. That's not the point. The point is, they're using the federal system to contain you while they control the narrative. By the time you get access to media or regulators, they'll have shaped the story so completely that anything you say will sound like a convicted criminal's desperate justification. I haven't been convicted. You will be, unless we can find something that changes the power dynamic. He leaned forward. Do you have anything at all that proves your claims? Evidence that's not covered by NDAs? Witnesses willing to testify? Documentation that clearly shows criminal activity rather than proprietary medical treatment? I thought about my encrypted files, my backups, my carefully documented observations, all of it created while under NDA, all of it vulnerable to being dismissed as stolen trade secrets. I have medical records that show a pattern of sedation for non-medical purposes, I said. Medication protocols that prioritize symptom suppression over treatment. Evidence that a patient's cognitive capacity is being artificially managed to facilitate corporate succession. That's your interpretation of records you had access to as part of your employment. Their interpretation will be that you're misunderstanding specialized treatment protocols. Without expert medical testimony supporting your interpretation, it's just competing narratives, and they have more resources to make their narrative credible. The door opened. A bailiff gestured. Arraignment's ready. Let's go. As David and I walked to the courtroom, I understood with absolute clarity. I'd lost. Not because I was wrong, but because they had the power to make wrong look right and right, look criminal. The arraignment lasted 8 minutes. The federal prosecutor, young, confident, reading from prepared notes, argued that I was a sophisticated flight risk who'd already demonstrated willingness to violate court orders by contacting media despite pending litigation. The judge, barely looking at me, agreed. Bail set at $500,000, which might as well have been $500 million. I was going to sit in federal detention while Byrne Keller completed whatever they'd planned for Larkin, while the medication patents got transferred, while thousands of people lost access to affordable medications. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. They processed me back into detention. Strip search, orange jumpsuit, cell with a metal bed and a toilet that didn't fully flush. A cellmate who took one look at me and said, "White collar?" "Whistleblower," I corrected. She laughed. "Same thing in here. Either way, they got you." I sat on that metal bed, in that cell, and felt the full weight of institutional power designed to crush individual resistance. Marion had tried to warn me. David had confirmed it. And I'd walked into their trap anyway, believing truth mattered more than power. I'd been so stupidly naive. The first night in detention, I couldn't sleep. Just lay on metal, staring at concrete, replaying every choice that had led here. Every moment I could have stayed silent. Every decision to document instead of ignore. Every refusal to sign their papers and take their money. I'd chosen integrity. And integrity had bought me a federal prison cell and the certainty that everything I'd tried to protect would be destroyed anyway. Around 3 a.m., a guard appeared at my cell. "You have a visitor. Attorney visit. Let's go." David Park, I assumed. Ready to discuss plea agreements and damage control. Except the person waiting in the attorney conference room wasn't David Park. It was Dr. Kelani. She looked older than I remembered, or maybe just exhausted. She waited until the guard left before speaking. "They're killing him," she said without preamble. "Larkin, the new medication protocol they implemented after you left. It's not treatment anymore. It's managed euthanasia disguised as palliative care." I stared at her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I can't participate anymore. Because I took an oath too, and I've broken it so completely that I can't even recognize myself." She pulled out a thumb drive. "Everything. Complete medical records, medication protocols, audio recordings of conversations between Judith Kane and Rebecca Stross discussing timeline acceleration. Proof that they're sedating Larkin to death while forcing him to sign documents transferring patent control." "Why now? Why not before?" "Because I was afraid. Because they convinced me that protecting the company meant protecting public health, that letting Larkin die privately meant saving the medications that millions depend on. But that was always a lie. They're not protecting his legacy. They're hijacking it. And I can't be part of that anymore." She slid the thumb drive across the table. "This breaks every NDA I signed. This ends my career. This might put me in the cell next to yours. But it's also everything you need to prove you were telling the truth. Expert medical testimony, insider documentation, evidence that can't be dismissed as misinterpretation. Why give it to me? You could go directly to regulators." "Because they've already compromised the regulatory channels. But you've already made contact with journalists, with medical ethics boards, with people outside their control. You have the network. You have the courage. I have the proof. Together we might actually stop this." I took the thumb drive, feeling its weight like a promise or a grenade. "They'll destroy you," I said. "They already have. I just hadn't admitted it yet." Dr. Kelani stood. "There's a journalist on that drive. Investigative reporter who's been following Byrne Keller for years, waiting for someone on the inside to break. Her name is Simone Wells. She'll know what to do with this." "How do I contact her from detention?" "Your arraignment hearing is public record. She'll have seen it. She'll be waiting for someone to reach out. Use your one phone call. Call this number. She wrote digits on her palm, showed me, then wiped them away. Don't write it down. Memorize it. When she answers, say, Marion Tesla sent me. She'll understand. Dr. Kilani moved toward the door, then paused. I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner. I'm sorry I let them convince me that complicity was pragmatism. I'm sorry I made you carry this alone when I should have stood with you from the beginning. You're standing now, I said. That's what matters. She left. The guard returned me to my cell, and I sat there, thumb drive hidden in the waistband of my jumpsuit, memorizing phone numbers and understanding that the war wasn't over. It was just finally fair. I spent my one phone call exactly as Dr. Kelani had instructed. The number rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered. Yes. Marion Tesla sent me, I said. 3 seconds of silence. Then, I saw your arraignment. Federal detention. Yes. Charges? Trade secrets theft, espionage, wire fraud. Bullshit charges. What do you have? Everything. Complete medical records. Insider testimony from the lead physician. Audio evidence of corporate conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud. Can you get it out of detention? It's on a thumb drive, currently hidden somewhere they haven't searched yet. A pause. Can you get a message to your public defender? Maybe. Tell him to file a motion for evidence preservation related to whistleblower retaliation. Use the exact phrase, evidence preservation for whistleblower retaliation claims. That will trigger protocols that protect documentation from destruction. Meanwhile, I'll start making calls. Can you survive in there? For 72 hours? I don't have a choice. You're tougher than you think. Marion told me about you. Said you were the first person who actually gave a damn about stopping them instead of just protecting yourself. Hold on. Help is coming. She hung up. I spent the next day figuring out how to survive federal detention. The rules were different from county jail. Quieter, more controlled, but with an undercurrent of violence that made every interaction feel like negotiation. My cellmate, a woman named Tessa, who was awaiting trial for tax evasion, gave me the basics. Don't talk about your case. Don't ask about anyone else's case. Don't borrow. Don't lend. Stay neutral in the hierarchy. You're white collar, so you're low threat, which means you're also low protection. Be polite, be invisible, and pray you're out before anyone decides you're worth exploiting. Sound advice. I followed it. David Park visited on day 2, looking harassed and confused. Your case just got very complicated, he said. We've received notice from a journalist named Simone Wells that she's filing Freedom of Information Act requests for all documentation related to your arrest. She's also contacted the Medical Ethics Board, the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations, and 3 federal legislators whose committees oversee pharmaceutical regulation. Suddenly, everyone's interested in why you were arrested. That's good, right? It's attention, which can be good or terrible, depending on what you actually have. Do you have evidence that justifies this level of scrutiny? I have evidence of medical fraud, corporate conspiracy, and elder abuse at a pharmaceutical company that controls essential medication patents. Evidence that will prove I'm a whistleblower, not a criminal. He leaned back, processing. If that's true, you need to file formal whistleblower complaints immediately. Quitam action under the False Claims Act, SEC whistleblower complaint, FDA adverse event reports, every protection available. That creates legal frameworks that make retaliatory prosecution much harder to justify. Can you file those from detention? I can file the paperwork, but you'll need to provide detailed documentation and testimony, which means he trailed off, understanding the problem. Which means I need to get the evidence out of detention without it being seized or destroyed, I finished. David looked at me carefully. I didn't hear you say you currently possess evidence in detention. That would be a security violation. What I heard was a hypothetical about documentation that might exist and might need protection. Hypothetically, I agreed. Hypothetically, if such evidence existed, the safest way to protect it would be to surrender it directly to federal authorities conducting oversight of your claims. The FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations, for instance, or the Inspector General of Health and Human Services. They have authority to receive whistleblower documentation and legal obligation to protect it from retaliation. How do I contact them from in here? You don't. I do. In my capacity as your attorney, representing your interests in potential whistleblower actions. He pulled out his phone. I'm going to make some calls. You're going to write down everything you remember about what you witnessed. Every detail, every date, every conversation. The more specific your account, the more credible your claims. I spent the next 6 hours writing, longhand, on legal pads David provided, documenting everything I'd observed in Suite 47, the medication protocols, the conversations I'd overheard, the pattern of cognitive manipulation, the corporate visitors who'd assessed Larkin's capacity, Judith Kane's threats, Dr. Kalani's confession. By the time I finished, I'd filled 47 pages with observations that read less like nursing notes and more like testimony in a criminal conspiracy case. David took the pages. This is extraordinary. If even half of this is verifiable, Byrne Keller is facing criminal charges and civil liability that could destroy the company. That's not the goal, I said. The goal is stopping them from weaponizing medication patents. The goal is protecting Larkin Byrne from being killed for corporate convenience. Those goals might be incompatible. If we expose this publicly, the company could collapse. Stock price crashes, investor panic, leadership chaos, all the things Larkin supposedly wanted to prevent. He wanted to prevent the trust from controlling the patents. That's still possible if we move fast enough. He has legal mechanisms prepared to restructure ownership. We just need to give him time to execute them before Kane and Stross can declare him incompetent. David looked skeptical. You're assuming he's still alive and capable of legal action. Dr. Kalani's recordings are from 3 days ago. He was alive then. Sedated, but alive. Then we need to move faster than they can. I'll contact the Inspector General, the FDA, and the reporters Simone Wells is coordinating with. We flood the zone with evidence simultaneously. Multiple investigations, multiple stories, multiple pressure points. Make it impossible for them to contain. That's what Marion said. Detonate everything at once. Marion Tesler, the executive assistant who fought Byrne Keller for years. She helped me understand what I was facing, and she connected me with people who could help. David smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Then maybe you're not as alone as you thought. Give me 72 hours. I'll build the case. You survive in here. And when we're ready, we'll burn their house down with the truth. He left. I went back to my cell, exhausted and cautiously hopeful. Tessa looked at me with new interest. You're the pharmaceutical whistleblower. Saw it on the news. They're saying you tried to blackmail a dying billionaire. They're lying? I figured. Rich people always lie. When they're scared, she grinned. Make them regret fucking with you. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Not because detention was comfortable, but because I'd finally stopped being alone in this fight. The cavalry was coming. The truth was armed. And Byrne Keller was about to discover that silencing one nurse was easy. Silencing federal investigators, ethics boards, and investigative journalists simultaneously was impossible. The explosion happened on a Thursday morning at 6 a.m. Pacific Time, coordinated across 6 different platforms simultaneously. Simone Wells published her investigation in ProPublica. The Billionaire They're Killing Quietly: How Byrne Keller Corporation is Manipulating Its Dying CEO to Seize Control of Essential Medication Patents. Complete with Dr. Kaylani's audio recordings, medication protocol analysis, and expert testimony that the treatment I documented constituted medical abuse disguised as specialized care. The FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations announced they were opening a formal investigation into allegations of improper medication protocols and potential violations of informed consent requirements at a private medical facility in Washington state. The Inspector General of Health and Human Services issued a statement. We take seriously any allegations of Medicare fraud, elder abuse, or corporate manipulation of medical treatment. An investigation has been opened. 3 members of Congress, all on committees overseeing pharmaceutical regulation, issued joint letters demanding immediate testimony from Byrne Keller's board about deeply troubling allegations of corporate malfeasance and potential violations of fiduciary duty to patients and shareholders. The Medical Ethics Board of Washington State filed an emergency motion to inspect Vestra Institute and examine treatment protocols for a patient identified only as LB. And the Seattle Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal all ran versions of the same story. A pharmaceutical billionaire was being held in medical isolation, sedated and manipulated, while his company prepared to seize control of patents that affected millions of lives. By 9 a.m., Byrne Keller's stock had dropped 18%. By noon, board members were publicly demanding answers. By 3 p.m., Judith Kane and Rebecca Stross had both been placed on administrative leave pending internal investigation. I watched it all from a television in the detention common area, surrounded by other inmates who'd suddenly decided I was worth knowing. You did that? Tessa asked, watching stock tickers crash on CNBC. I documented what I saw. Other people made it matter. You're going to be famous. I'm going to be unemployed and probably still facing federal charges. David Park arrived at 4 p.m. with news. The prosecutor's office wants to meet. They're considering dropping charges in exchange for your cooperation with the federal investigations. Considering? They don't want to admit they arrested a whistleblower on false pretenses, so they're exploring alternative resolutions. Translation: if you agree not to sue them for wrongful prosecution, they'll quietly make the charges disappear. And if I don't agree? Then you sit in detention while they investigate whether your arrest was legitimate or retaliatory, which could take months, during which time you can't testify publicly, can't support the investigations, and can't help protect Larkin Byrne. That's extortion. That's bureaucracy. They made a mistake trusting Byrne Keller's version of events. Now they need a face-saving way to correct it. He pulled out papers. This is the agreement. You're released immediately. Charges dismissed with prejudice. and you're granted formal whistleblower protections under federal statutes. In exchange, you provide full cooperation with all investigations and agree not to pursue civil action against the Department of Justice for wrongful arrest. I read the document carefully. This doesn't protect me from Byrne Keller's lawsuits. No, but those become much harder to pursue once you have federal whistleblower status, and the investigators have already started seizing records from Vestra. The evidence they're finding corroborates everything you documented. Byrne Keller's legal team is going to be too busy defending against federal charges to waste resources suing you. I signed. Not because I agreed it was fair, but because staying in detention meant abandoning everything I'd fought for. They processed my release in 2 hours, returned my clothes, my phone, my belongings, handed me papers confirming my charges were dismissed and my whistleblower status was formal and protected. David walked me to the exit. Simone Wells is waiting outside. She wants to interview you on camera. You don't have to do it, but it would help solidify the narrative before Byrne Keller's PR team can reframe. What are they saying? That you're a troubled employee who misunderstood specialized treatment and created a false narrative for attention and profit. That Larkin Byrne is receiving excellent care and the allegations are defamatory fiction. That's exactly what Dr. Kaylani predicted they'd say. Which is why Dr. Kaylani's testimony is so valuable. She's a credible insider who corroborates your account. Together, you're devastating to their defense. I stepped outside into afternoon sunlight that felt aggressive after days in artificial detention lighting. Simone Wells waited on the sidewalk, early 40s, practical clothes, the confident posture of someone who'd faced corporate lawyers before and won. "You're tougher than Marion described," she said by way of greeting. "Ready to go on record?" "What do you need?" "Your story, first-person account of what you witnessed. We'll film it, publish it tomorrow, time it with the congressional hearings that just got announced. Make it impossible for Byrne Keller to claim you're making this up." We did the interview in a park, natural lighting and traffic sounds creating the kind of authentic backdrop that made everything I said feel more real than any studio setting could have managed. I talked for 90 minutes, answering questions about protocols and medications and the gradual realization that I was participating in something monstrous. "What made you decide to speak up?" Simone asked. The moment I understood that staying silent meant being complicit in crimes that would hurt thousands of people who depend on medications Byrne Keller controls. I took an oath to protect patients. That oath didn't stop applying just because my patient was a billionaire whose company wanted to manipulate him for profit. "What do you want to happen now?" "I want Larkin Byrne to receive actual medical care instead of corporate theatre. I want the medication patents to be protected from predatory pricing. I want the people who turned healthcare into corporate warfare to face consequences. And I want other healthcare workers to know that whistleblowing is possible, even when you're fighting institutional power that seems infinite." The interview ended. Simone reviewed footage, nodded satisfaction. "This is going to hit hard. Your credibility is unimpeachable. Your details are specific, and you come across as exactly what you are. Someone who tried to do the right thing and got crushed for it. Until you didn't stay crushed. I had help. You had courage. The help just made sure it wasn't wasted." She handed me a card. "Call me if Byrne Keller's lawyers contact you. They're going to try intimidation first." then settlement offers. Don't engage without legal representation. You're too important to this investigation to let them silence you now. I took the card, looked at my phone, 73 messages, most from numbers I didn't recognize, reporters, lawyers, people claiming to be Larkin's family, everyone wanting a piece of the story that had just detonated across national media. I ignored all of them except one, a text from a number identified only as MT. You did it. The truth is armed now. They can't stop all of it. Proud of you. Marion. I wrote back, "Thank you for showing me how." Her response came immediately. "You showed yourself? I just helped you see it." That night, I went back to my apartment, still trashed from the FBI search, but finally mine again. I cleaned slowly, putting my life back in order while watching news coverage of the scandal I'd helped expose. By midnight, 3 board members had resigned from Byrne Keller. The company's general counsel had been fired, and the Washington State Attorney General had announced a criminal investigation into allegations of elder abuse and corporate fraud. The machinery of accountability was finally moving. All I'd had to do was refuse to stay silent when silence was the only thing they couldn't afford. The congressional hearing happened 2 weeks after my release. I testified for 4 hours, answering questions from legislators who ranged from genuinely outraged to performatively skeptical. The hearing room was packed with media, pharmaceutical industry representatives, and advocates who'd been fighting medication price manipulation for years. Dr. Kaylani testified before me, her medical expertise lending credibility that my nursing observations alone couldn't have achieved. She walked the committee through medication protocols, explaining, in precise clinical language, how the treatment I documented was designed to suppress symptoms rather than manage disease, creating windows of apparent capacity while accelerating underlying decline. "This wasn't palliative care," she said, voice steady, despite obvious stress. "This was pharmacological manipulation designed to keep Mr. Byrne conscious and compliant long enough to sign documents his lawyers needed executed. We were using medical expertise not to heal, but to facilitate corporate succession. And I participated in that until I couldn't live with what it made me. When my turn came, I focused on the human impact, the isolation of watching someone deteriorate in secrecy, the moral crisis of being ordered to prioritize corporate interests over patient welfare, the systematic effort to silence anyone who questioned the ethics of what was happening. Mr. Byrne was a patient who deserved dignity, compassion, and care focused on his well-being, I testified. Instead, he became an asset to be managed, and when I tried to advocate for his interests, I was fired, threatened, arrested, and told that my conscience was less important than corporate succession. That's not healthcare. That's abuse disguised with medical credentials. The most dramatic moment came when Representative Alicia Morrison, who chaired the committee, asked me directly, "If you could speak to Mr. Byrne now, what would you say?" I thought about those early conversations, his exhaustion, his fear that everything he'd built would be weaponized, his desperate hope that someone might care enough to help. "I'd tell him that I kept my promise," I said, "that I saw what they were doing and I refused to participate, that I documented the truth even when it cost me everything, and that he wasn't alone. There are still people who believe patient welfare matters more than corporate profit." The hearing ended with bipartisan calls for federal legislation to prevent corporate manipulation of medical treatment and strengthen protections for healthcare whistleblowers. Whether those calls would result in actual laws remained uncertain, but at least the conversation was happening. The bigger breakthrough came 3 days later. Federal investigators, acting on warrants issued after the congressional hearing, raided Vestra Institute and seized complete records. What they found went beyond what I'd documented: systematic medication fraud affecting multiple patients, falsified treatment records to justify billing, and an evidence that the specialized treatment protocols were being marketed to other wealthy clients as a way to manage difficult succession situations. Vestra wasn't just hiding Larkin Byrne's treatment, it was running an entire service helping wealthy families keep inconvenient illnesses secret. The facility was shut down immediately. Dr. Kaylani and I were both granted immunity in exchange for testimony, and the investigation expanded to include everyone who'd participated in creating the infrastructure of silence: lawyers, board members, the corporate executives who'd designed the succession trust. But the revelation that stopped me cold came from a journalist following the financial trail. Larkin Byrne hadn't just been fighting to prevent his company from being taken over. He'd discovered that the trust designed to protect his legacy had been secretly modified by Judith Kane and Rebecca Stross to include provisions that would immediately transfer medication patents to a shell corporation they controlled. A corporation that had already negotiated pricing agreements with pharmacy benefit managers that would triple the cost of essential medications. The succession plan wasn't about protecting Byrne Keller's mission. It was about using Larkin's death to enable the largest medication price increase in pharmaceutical history, generating billions in profit while making treatments unaffordable for millions. They hadn't just been manipulating a dying man, they'd been planning to use his death as the trigger for systematic corporate theft disguised as succession management. When that story broke, the stock didn't just drop, it cratered. The company's board voted to dissolve the trust entirely, fire everyone involved in its creation, and implement an emergency restructuring that placed patent control in a genuine public health foundation, exactly what Larkin had been trying to accomplish before he got too sick to finish. Justice, it turned out, was sometimes just truth that finally got loud enough to matter. The question everyone kept asking me: where is Larkin Byrne now? What's his condition? I didn't know. Federal investigators had taken control of his medical care, transferring him to a legitimate facility with actual oversight. But his medical information was protected, and I wasn't family. I assumed I'd never see him again, that my role in his story had ended when I'd stopped being his nurse and started being the person who exposed what they'd done to him. I was wrong. 6 weeks after the congressional hearing, I received a message through David Park. Larkin Byrne wanted to see me. He was at a private hospice in Oregon, receiving actual palliative care from physicians whose only goal was his comfort and dignity. The facility was small, quiet, and ruthlessly committed to the principle that dying people deserve autonomy and truth. I drove down on a Saturday morning, nervous in ways I hadn't been even during the hearing. I'd testified about him, fought for him, turned his private medical crisis into public scandal. I had no idea how he'd feel about that. A nurse met me at the entrance. Professional, kind, nothing like the corporate surveillance I'd experienced at Vestra. "He's been looking forward to this," she said. leading me through hallways that felt like a home instead of a facility. He's lucid today. The new care team has him on protocols that prioritize quality of life over symptom suppression. He's weaker physically, but mentally clearer than he's been in months. She stopped at a door. He asked that you come in alone. Is that all right? I nodded. Larkin sat in a chair by a window overlooking mountains, wrapped in blankets despite the summer warmth. The tremor was worse, his movement more limited, but his eyes, when they met mine, carried a clarity I hadn't seen since that first day in Suite 47. You broke every rule they gave you, he said, voice soft but steady. And you saved everything I spent my life building. I just documented what I saw. You risked your freedom, your career, your entire future, to make sure the truth couldn't be buried. That's not just anything. He gestured to a chair near his. Please, sit. We should talk. I sat. For a moment, we just looked at each other, patient and nurse, conspirators in the fight against corporate silence. They told me what you went through, he continued. The arrest, the detention, the systematic attempt to destroy you for refusing to participate in what they were doing. I'm sorry. That should never have happened. You didn't cause it. I created the systems that made it possible. The trust, the lawyers, the culture of secrecy that let people like Judith Kane believe that manipulation was just effective business strategy. He paused, gathering energy. The foundation is established now, the one I'd been trying to create before the illness got too aggressive to finish. Patent control transferred to a genuine public health entity with governance structures that prevent the kind of predatory pricing they'd planned. Your testimony made that possible. Dr. Kaylani's testimony helped. Dr. Kaylani participated in the abuse for months before her conscience caught up with her courage. You never participated. You questioned from the start. And when questioning wasn't enough, you acted. There's a difference. He looked out at the mountains. I'm dying. Probably weeks now, not months. The experimental protocols Vestra had me on were buying time at the cost of awareness. Now I have awareness, but not much time. I've made my peace with that, but I needed to see you before the end. Needed to thank you for being the person I'd hoped existed, but wasn't sure I'd ever meet. Someone who cared more about us doing right than staying safe. I was terrified the entire time. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to act despite it. He smiled slightly. Marion told me you were special. She was right. You've talked to Marion. She visits weekly, helps me understand how the foundation should be structured to prevent future manipulation. Turns out, having someone who survived corporate destruction is valuable when you're trying to prevent it from happening again. He reached into his pocket with his functioning hand, pulled out a folded paper. I've established an endowment, money for healthcare workers who become whistleblowers, legal fees, lost wages, career rebuilding. It's named for you. The idea being, if we make it financially survivable to speak truth to power, maybe more people will. I took the paper. It was a foundation charter. The Whistleblower Support Fund, established with $20 million, designed to ensure that nurses and doctors who exposed medical fraud wouldn't face financial ruin for honoring their oaths. I can't accept this being named for me, I said. You already did everything hard. Let me do this one easy thing. His expression grew serious. They're facing criminal charges now. Kane, Stross, the board members who knew what was happening. They'll probably serve time. Vestra's been shut down permanently. And the pharmaceutical industry is being investigated for similar practices at other specialized facilities. You started all of that by refusing to stay quiet. I just didn't want to watch you die alone and exploited. You saw me as a person instead of a corporate asset. In that world, with those people, that was revolutionary. He leaned back, exhausted from the conversation. I need to rest now, but I wanted you to know. What you did mattered. The patents are protected. The medications will stay affordable. And thousands of people who never know your name will survive because you had the courage to document truth when everyone else was being paid to create fiction. I stood to leave. He stopped me with a gesture. One more thing. They'll try to make you regret this. The legal fights aren't over. Byrne Keller's liability insurers are going to argue you caused financial damage. You'll face years of depositions and litigation. It will be exhausting and invasive and cruel. I know. Don't let them make you believe this wasn't worth it. Don't let the cost of truth make you wish you'd stayed silent. You saved lives. That's the only metric that matters. I left him there, sitting by the window, wrapped in blankets and dignity, and the peace that comes from knowing your life's work will survive your death. He died 3 weeks later, peacefully, according to the hospice staff, surrounded by people who cared about him as a human being, not a corporate entity. The obituaries were strange to read. Some painted him as a visionary who'd revolutionized pharmaceutical access. Others focused on the scandal, the corporate manipulation, the dramatic exposure. A few mentioned me, though most got details wrong. The truth was simpler. Larkin Byrne was a complicated man who'd built something important and then got sick, while people who saw only profit tried to steal what he'd created. And he'd been lucky enough to encounter a nurse who believed patient advocacy mattered more than self-preservation. The litigation he'd warned about did materialize. Byrne Keller's insurance companies sued me for tortious interference and defamation per se. The suits were eventually dismissed, but the process took 2 years and cost me sleep, money, and countless hours of depositions. The whistleblower fund Larkin had established covered most of my legal fees. Without it, I'd have been destroyed financially, despite being proven right. I never went back to nursing, not because I didn't love it, but because the scandal made me radioactive in healthcare employment. Facilities were afraid that hiring me would invite scrutiny or suggest they had something to hide. The whistleblower protection laws were theoretical. The practical reality was that speaking truth had ended my career. Instead, I became an advocate, working with legislators to strengthen healthcare whistleblower protections, consulting with medical ethics boards about corporate influence in patient care, teaching nursing students about the gap between the oath we take and the pressures that make honoring it dangerous. Marion and I co-wrote a book about corporate capture of healthcare. Dr. Kailani contributed a chapter about how good people get convinced to participate in terrible systems. The book sold modestly, but it reached the people who needed it. Healthcare workers facing ethical crises and wondering if speaking up was worth the cost. Some of them reached out, told their own stories, created their own documentation, and slowly, incrementally, the culture started shifting. Not because institutions suddenly developed consciences, but because enough individuals decided their individual consciences mattered more than institutional pressure. 3 years after Larkin's death, Congress passed the Healthcare Whistleblower Protection Act. It wasn't perfect, no law is, but it created stronger retaliation protections, mandatory investigation of good faith reports, and financial support for healthcare workers who lost employment after exposing fraud. Representative Morrison, who'd chaired the hearing where I testified, called me when the bill passed. "This wouldn't have happened without you," she said. "You made corporate medical abuse real instead of theoretical. You gave us a story that made people care. I was just one person who refused to stay quiet. You were the person who proved it was possible. That matters more than you know." Maybe it did. I still had moments. 3 a.m. anxiety, watching news about pharmaceutical companies negotiating prices, seeing stories about corporate intimidation of whistleblowers, where I wondered if the cost had been worth it. Then I'd receive emails from nurses who'd used the new protections to report fraud without losing their livelihoods. Or I'd see medication access data showing that the foundation Larkin had established was keeping prices stable for essential drugs. Or I'd meet healthcare workers who told me they'd thought about staying silent until they heard my story and realized courage was possible. In those moments, I knew Larkin had been right. The only metric that mattered was whether speaking had saved lives. It had. It still did. And while I'd paid dearly for honoring my oath, I'd also discovered something. The corporate lawyers and intimidation specialists would never understand. You can destroy someone's career, freeze their assets, arrest them, and humiliate them, and make their life financially impossible. But you can't make them regret choosing integrity. You can't make them wish they'd been complicit. You can't take away the clarity that comes from knowing you did the right thing, even when it cost everything. I carried Larkin's secret out of Suite 47 and into sunlight. I made sure it couldn't stay buried. And in doing so, I learned that some silences are more expensive than any truth. The question was never whether I could afford to speak. It was whether I could afford not to. 10 years after Larkin Byrne's death, I stood in a nursing school auditorium, invited to speak to graduating students about ethics in modern healthcare. Looking out at hundreds of young faces about to take the same oath I'd taken, I understood something I hadn't known when I was sitting where they sat. The oath isn't just a promise to patients, it's a promise to yourself, a commitment that no matter what institutional pressures you face, no matter what corporate interests try to make you complicit in harm, no matter what personal cost you might incur, you will not allow your skills to be weaponized against the vulnerable. Some of them would honor that oath, some wouldn't. Some would face impossible choices and choose survival over principle. And I didn't judge them for it, because I understood how terrifying it is to stand alone against power. But a few, maybe just a handful in that room, would encounter their own Suite 47. Their own moment where staying silent meant participating in something monstrous, and speaking meant risking everything they'd worked for. Those were the ones I was speaking to, the ones who'd need to know that courage was possible, that whistleblowing could survive corporate retaliation, that truth could matter more than money. "You're going to see things that disturb you," I told them. "You're going to encounter protocols that prioritize profit over healing, corporate interests over patient welfare, legal liability over ethical practice, and you'll face a choice: document and speak, or observe and forget. Choose documentation, choose speaking, choose the risk of consequence over the certainty of complicity. Because healthcare without ethics isn't healing, it's just expensive harm. And your oath, the one you're about to take, is a promise that you'll recognize the difference, even when powerful people are invested in making it invisible. I left the auditorium knowing I'd probably reach 3 or 4 people, maybe fewer, but those 3 or 4 might become the nurses who refuse to participate in the next corporate manipulation of patient care, who document instead of ignore, who speak instead of rationalize. And maybe, if enough of us keep refusing, keep documenting, keep speaking, the systems will finally change. Not because institutions develop consciences, but because enough individuals decide their individual consciences are non-negotiable. That's what Larkin Byrne's secret taught me. That's what Suite 47 cost and gave me. And that's what I carry still. The certainty that some truths are worth every storm they bring. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe to Mr. Douglas Tales for more stories, where courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to rise anyway. Every fall becomes a foundation. Every storm proves your strength. Every truth you speak becomes a light for someone else fighting in the dark. Because we don't tell these stories to entertain. We tell them to remind you you're stronger than the systems designed to silence you. Your voice matters more than their money. Your integrity is the only thing they can't buy, manipulate, or destroy. Rise above every storm. We'll be here, telling the stories that prove you can.